without further ado, let's just discuss the objectives. No? We'll start off with the concept of machine learning para lang may working definition tayo. This will just take 5 to 10 minutes usually. And then we'll set up the environment, yung tools. No? Yung objective natin actually for this morning. What are the tools that visual data scientists use to actually create these machine learning models? Okay. And we'd like to have a certain mindset, no? Organizing our thoughts into how we execute these concepts on what types of problems it's solve. And it's also the reason why I asked what your background is. Kasi kung meron kayong very specific background, then it would uh this would allow you to this would allow us actually to explore different situations para malalaman natin saan papasok yung machine learning, saan papasok yung software there. And really, at the end of the day, it's all about solving problems. The more problems we solve, then the better we can improve our work. Okay, so let's start off with the main term, data science. And if you notice, we're sort of using data science and machine learning interchangeably, but actually it's much more than that. No? It's quite distinct in a way. So a better way to show this is to show you this Venn diagram, okay? An intersection between the different concepts of data science, machine learning, and other fields in STEM, such as mathematics and even business. So if we take a look at the diagram, data science is right smack in the middle of computer science, statistical mathematics, and business, because the foundation will, of course, be the hard sciences, statistics, math, probability theory, and all those things. However, in terms of application, that's where computer science comes in. How do we utilize compute? Well, actually, when you say computer science, it's not really about computers, but the root word of computer is compute, no? To perform some computation in order to solve a particular problem. But of course, part of that is scaling with all these powerful computers to be able to implement concepts in mathematics to scale your product or scale your solution. And you have the business side of things because computer science will not exist or computing something will not exist if there's no problem at hand that will be quite valuable to various stakeholders, whether that be your end users or users in the company, internal usage, or even markets that you haven't even heard of yet. And then intersection of that would be things like software development, because of course you need to write code to actually automate these things. So take a business concept, write code for it, and run it in a computer. The analytics side will come in terms of the results. How do we interpret these results based on the code that we have generated? The machine learning part is a bit weird because if you take a look at the Venn diagram, that's an intersection siya ng computer science and mathematics. Because really, it's about the implementation of certain concepts. No? At the end of the day, we'll find out that machine learning is really just a branch of statistics. Kaya ako tinanong, baka may background sa statistics. More formally, we sometimes refer machine learning to multivariate statistics. Now, if you break down that term, many, variate, variations, multiple variations, or multiple factors that affect a certain outcome, statistically speaking. No? To give you an example, let's take the opposite definition. Ano yung opposite ng multi? Single. Single statistics, meaning you only have one variable that affects the outcome. But as we all know, the world is much more complex than that. If you're, let's say, a farmer who'd like to optimize yung growth ng crops, you're not only considering one variable like weather, you're also considering other factors. Magkano ba yung bigas sa community na? Magkano ba yung gastos para sa pangmalakad ng materials to actually grow your crops? So it's not just one dimension when considering tackling a problem. And that's why machine learning is so powerful because you actually utilize multiple variables in the equation, okay, to be able to come up with some rational solution or decision making that's actually relevant to stakeholders. And that's an important part of machine learning, decisions. You have a problem, probably identify a problem, you need to make a decision on a particular solution for that problem. machine learning does help in developing that. That's why I think one of you mentioned what are some insights. Machine learning might drive insights. Yes, that's partially true. But at the end of the day, it's really about taking those insights and making a proper decision. Okay? So the outcome of machine learning is really how to make proper decisions to solve these problems, and to implement that, we need to write software. So let's dwell muna on the bread and butter of machine learning, which is data. Data is very important for machine learning to work. It's what machine learning is based on. In fact, if you take a look at the slides, now I've provided links on how the value of data has evolved over the past 2 decades. Starting off with a popular article from Wired back in 2014, there was this term coined that data is the new oil. Back then, there were a lot of people who were quite skeptic about it because, yes, they understand data is very important, but they didn't realize how far they could actually take data. So the likes of things like yung, not sure kung napanood nyo sa Netflix, the Great Hack, wherein they utilized social network data to drive or to influence how elections work in the US. So data was very important in that regard. So it became political, it became a political tool. So before data was given quite significance, we had the industrial age wherein oil was the valuable resource because oil is what made machines run for manufacturing, creating all these products, cars, um, utilities for houses, and all sorts of things that drove the modern world into the 20th century. However, these days, that's a very common task already, and data is the new driving factor because data actually affects economies, data actually affects how big leaders make certain decisions, and as a result, this would also affect industry. Oil itself, the price of oil is largely driven by data as well. So data is the new oil, and as you can see in the other links, it has evolved. They were sort of trying to contradict it, but at the end of the day, it had a common theme, and that is data is quite important. So being able to, or data is actually the decision maker of the modern world. Okay? Um, so being able to understand how to process that data makes you a modern man or modern woman in the case of utilizing data or weaponizing data. Now, whether that be for good or for bad is entirely up to you. Because with great power, once you unlock this skill, comes, well, it depends. Yun nga, whether you use it for good or bad is entirely up to you. It's actually quite a double-edged sword because people have weaponized data over the past years to either influence decision making or to actually help people in improving their lives. So it is quite manipulative, but at the end of the day, it's garbage in, garbage out. The quality of whatever you are assessing will depend on the quality of the data you actually feed your solution. Okay? Now, just to inspire you a bit more, how does data play a role in pop culture? I've also provided some links on what you can watch. Siguro kung may free time kayo, just to inspire you to get worked up about data and machine learning. So one popular movie I often recommend is Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt, who utilized data to define how a performance of certain players actually work, and based on that make the appropriate decisions on how to best win the game. Now that's very interesting because for all you know, for the longest time, we always in the world of sports, we always depend on performance of these athletes. But if you take a look at it, the performance of these athletes can be reduced to numbers. Okay, whether that be basketball, baseball, football, or what have you. In fact, I actually have an advisee right now sa university who's using this specific. He's actually a varsity baseball player. He's already playing for nationals dito sa Pilipinas. He's actually flying off to Malaysia, I think, for some competition. He's a smart guy. He has a CS background. He's taking his master's right now. Ang thesis na wino-work on niya is baseball. Okay, fine. Varsity baseball siya, pero he's actually working on baseball as part of his thesis. And he's using this thing called a Markov chain, which is a very specific probabilistic model that simulates, it's under the field of computer simulation. It simulates how to define different states or how to simulate different states of certain outcomes. Okay. In the case of baseball, he's examining um, how a pitcher would make a certain pitch given a situation. Kasi sa baseball, ako, hindi malalim yung background ko sa baseball. No? Pero I do know some basics and because of him, mas lumalim pa yung pagkakalam ko sa baseball when you're tackling the problem. No? So, apparently in baseball, if you know how to make a certain pitch, if you're the pitcher, based on what you know about the performance of the batter, you will be able to change things up. No? If alam mo mahina yung batter sa curveball, he would definitely throw a curveball. Same goes for the batter. Kung kilala ng batter yung pitcher, if he or she knows how the technique of the pitcher when it comes to throwing a ball, then makaka-adjust siya accordingly. So the theory was, if I use some probabilistic model to determine the outcome of either the batter or the pitcher, then I will be able to make better decisions on how to play. Okay? So as a result, I would know how to play the game essentially. So we did the models for almost a year now. Tapos ang ganda ng results niya eh. Parang he was able to simulate the 2021 major leagues. Kinuha niya yung data, he ran the Markov chain model, tapos na-simulate niya yung 2021 performance. To the point na the margin of error between his simulation and the actual performance of the players were very, very small. Now, what does that mean? It means if the model is accurate, then he could actually determine how a player would perform vis-a-vis another player, whether that be a batter perspective or a pitcher perspective. Kasi naglolokohan pa nga kami. I was talking to him the other day na parang, well, you could actually use that for betting sa sugal. Halimbawa, what's the likelihood of someone actually winning the game? Tapos, syempre, of course, that's borderline gray area na rin. Pero the point there is that uh, truly enough, you could actually weaponize it for good. Another movie I would recommend is 21. This is a little bit dramatized, but it is based on a lot of data as well, probability data in particular. So the idea there is that we have geniuses that um, essentially rig the game 21. Okay, so Las Vegas casinos and all card counting essentially. So they use mathematics to be able to gamify or win the blackjack. Here's another personal favorite, numbers. So it's about two brothers, one working in the police force and another who's a mathematician. Um, and they use a lot of data science. Well, back then, it's a rather old series. Eh. Back then, it wasn't called data science. It was simply called mathematics or statistics. Pero it does have a lot of foundational concepts. And the math is actually quite solid. It's a bit dramatized, pero the math is solid. So yeah, it's a good series on how they apply mathematics to solve crime. It's a very interesting show. Okay, so if you're into machine learning, then technically you're a machine learning engineer or what people popularly know as a data scientist. Okay? So data scientist, well, it's a lot of things. No? Pero really, how we can define it is that a data scientist is a wizard of the modern day. Because if you think about, I'm not sure kung mahilig kayo sa fantasy or sa uh, those types of things. No? Pero the way magic has been portrayed in pop culture is that you have this thing called mana. So you can think of mana as data where these magicians derive their power from. And essentially a wizard or a magician is simply a manipulator of mana. So the same goes for data scientists. We'd be useless without data. So being able to utilize that data is how yung skill natin to utilize our data is how powerful of a magician we are. So it's about data wielding more than anything. How do we utilize data to create models to make certain decisions? And that's actually the beauty of machine learning and data science. And there's unlike discrete mathematics, wherein let's say what's an example of discrete mathematics? Addition, for example. One plus one is equal to two. No? There's a very specific solution to a problem. But in data science, as we'll see later on, uh, there's no one solution to the problem. There are many solutions that work that solve the same problem. Pero it's hard. There's no silver bullet. There's no one solution that can encompass the entire problem space. So what does that mean in terms of the industry? It means that there will still be a large demand for wizards of the modern day because you always need a different perspective of the solutions. There's no one solution to the problem. There's no one plus one is equal to two. You will always have your own interpretation, and it's not an exact science. Okay? You will only feel the result of it once it's actually applied to work. Okay? Unlike in discrete mathematics, if you know the actual solution 1 plus 1 equals 2, then you're done. Okay, but in this case, data is always ever evolving. So there will always be a need for data science. And of course, being able to write the code that allows you to manipulate this data will be of utmost importance. Even with the rise of a lot of modern technologies, modern machine learning models, you've probably heard of ChatGPT, as well as DAL-E or Midjourney, all these AI tools that are coming about that in the news they would sometimes spell doom for parang other jobs out there, like content creators or sort of on the edge already. Writers, chat GPT can write content that is as good as the writers that we have today. Okay. Pero if you think about it, for data scientists, they will always be needed because these tools are always improving. So even with the rise of AI, you still need stewards or arbiters of these AI technologies, and that's where data scientists are. So, all right. So enough of those concepts. So the two primary objectives for now, in terms of definitions, is to represent anything as what we call a multidimensional vector. So ito yung parang foundational, sort of foundational concept that we have to consider. Given a problem, how do we turn it into this thing called a multidimensional vector? Okay, we'll define what multidimensional vector is, but essentially, it's a numerical representation of our observation. So for example, let's say sa case ng manufacturing. Okay, kapag gumagawa tayo ng t-shirts sa isang factory. Yes, we understand what the t-shirt is. Yes, we understand what materials are. We can describe these materials and how an employee will eventually create a t-shirt from a material. But if we were to apply machine learning to it, then given what we are observing, so an employee creating a t-shirt, how do we represent that as a number, as a set of numbers? Not only a number, but a set of numbers. And that's what multidimensional vectors are. As mentioned earlier, it's not just one variable that affects a certain um, scenario, but we want multiple variables. So multiple numbers to express a or to describe an observation. And then from that, we develop a model based on the data. Now, for those of you who took some preliminary course on machine learning or data science, you probably heard of this term, model. Kailangan ko ng model para mag-predict ng X or Y. Okay? But really, what is a model? We could define a model as a set of rules. Okay? So for example, let's say nagpe-predict kayo ng stocks. Okay? The solution is to determine if you would, let's say, buy, sell, or hold the stock. Okay, those are the three possible outcomes of your solution. The model is the set of rules that tells you if you would buy, hold, or sell. Okay, so do not interchange it with an algorithm. Because an algorithm is means of developing a model. So in short, as a data scientist or machine learning engineer, your product is the model. how you get to the model will be based on the different algorithms that you're actually utilizing. Okay? And these algorithms will have to play on data. So in short, we need to be able, for you to be a wizard of the modern day, you need to take a look at the problem and describe it in terms of numbers, multiple numbers. Okay? And once you have that prepared, you will use those numbers to create this thing called a model. So by the end of the workshop, hopefully ganun yung maging skill set mo. You take a problem, of course, you analyze what the problem is, how you describe the different observations as multiple numbers, and then model or create a model out of it. Okay, the set of rules that allows you to make certain decisions. So, let's formally define what a vector is. Kasi yun yung kailangan natin introduce. Okay? So, a vector is simply a list of values that describes a data point or, let's say, an observation. Okay? An observation is technically anything that observation is actually any uh, little thing that you are studying in your problem. Okay, for example, let's say sa stocks. Okay? Again, this is where it gets down to the details. Kasi depende kung paano mo i-define um, yung vector mo. Okay? If a vector is simply a set of numbers that describes an observation, the next question in terms of the stocks problem is, what is your observation? Okay? Let's say you wanna determine if you wanna buy, sell, or hold. Okay? You could say that in order for me to determine that, I need to observe what the price is the previous day. Okay, so let's take that small problem for a moment. No? What is the price of a stock in the previous day? Now, based on how we define what data science is, why do you think that's a problem in terms of definition when defining what a vector is? Again, let me repeat the question. Ang goal natin is to predict if I want to buy, sell, or hold a stock. Now, in order for us to do that, we need to come up with a model, pero before that, we need to define our vector. Tapos, ang sabi ko, the definition of a vector is a set of numbers that describes an observation. So, ano yung ino-observe natin? Yung ino-observe natin sa ngayon is the price, a single price of a stock on the previous day. So, based on that definition, what do you think is the problem with that framing? Any thoughts on that? My observation is the price of a stock.
Sir?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Mahirap po siya gawan ng model kasi po volatile po yung stock prices.
Yes, pero you're taking the problem at a parang behavioral level. Doon tayo sa data level. Okay? Pero that's true, no? That's true. It's volatile. And that's why we want to create a model that probably um, can adapt to volatility. Pero again, going back to definition, okay? Aside from the market being volatile, what is the problem? Okay, analyze the question carefully. What is the problem if I define my observation as just the price of a stock on the previous day? So try to take it with what we have defined so far as what do we need to perform data science or machine learning? What definition have we discussed so far this morning that the statement, the observation is just the price of a single stock, a single price of a single stock the day before to predict in future or to make a certain decision. Any other guesses?
Sir, dahil po ba hindi siya multivariate, kailangan pa ng other factors?
Okay, correct. So that's actually the simplest way we can describe it. You can't perform data science on it or create a model out of it because by definition, sabi natin na we want to, or in order for us to create a model, it has to be multivariate. You're not simply only considering the price of a certain stock the previous day. So how do we make it multivariate? Well, there are a lot of ways to do that. And that's where the variety of data science models come in. Some models would take a look at 3, 4, 5 days before the actual price. So in that case, you would have 5 values that might affect the price tomorrow.
So in other words, sir, kung ano, historical data ang kailangan natin
Possibly historical data. Okay. Pero
para
if
makakuha
you,
tayo ng trend.
yeah, para makakuha ng trend, di ba? That's multivariate. Kasi what are your variables there? Day t minus 1, t minus 2, t minus 3, t minus 4, etc. Okay, so it becomes a multivariate problem. Now, some of you might, or some might even disagree. No, that's just one variable. It's just the price. Yes, that's true, but it's the price across multiple time periods. T minus n in this case. Okay? So my point there, the moral of the lesson there is that always take into context multiple variables. You can might even make it more complex. No? Aside from historical price at 5 time units before, you could also consider volume. Okay? Yung volume, no? Volume of trade. No? So that's a number. So now you have price, you have volume, and you probably have other things as well. Okay? And that's exactly what a vector is. A vector is simply a list of values that describes a data point. So going back to that example, if I define my vector as 5 units of price stock, no, before the current price, then those are my 5 values to describe a single decision, which is to either sell, hold, or buy. Okay. So what are the rules of defining the vector? When you define your vector, this is why this is the first problem when it comes to machine learning. You have to define the dimensionality of that vector. When I say dimensionality, it would be a single integer number that defines a vector, the size of that vector. So if I say that in order to define if I buy, hold, or sell a stock, I am defining that observation in 5 numbers, which are the 5 previous days. Kunwari, no? Then my dimensionality is 5. Okay, now, why is that important? Kasi that's the entire size that you will be playing with for the entirety of the problem. You can't change that. If you change that, it becomes a different solution. No, sabihin mo, ay, ayoko pala ng 5, gusto ko pala 10 observation. That's fine. Pero you will have to remodel things again in the context of 5 dimensions. So at the start pa lang, it's very integral that you define how big your vector is when you define the context of a problem.
Sir,
Yes, yes. Well,
question ko lang ba, yung dimensionality po ba, big sabihin po ba niya is yung number of data observations or number of variables?
no, no. Number of variables. Yeah, yung pangalawa yung mas correct. How
Okay
many
pa.
ways can you describe a certain observation? Okay. In our example kanina, dimensionality equals 5 kasi I describe the phenomenon of selling, buying, or holding a stock based on 5 values prior to my decision. Na yung 5 previous stock price, kunwari, the day before. I could have 1,000 observations. Ano ibig sabihin ng 1,000 observations? I have 1,000 data points. I have 1,000 observations where each observation is described in 5 numbers, which is the 5 previous stock prices of a certain decision. So your data could be billions of data points, but each data point is defined with a fixed dimensionality. Okay?
Thank you po, sir.
All right. Okay. Sige, other questions muna before we move ahead. I have another simple example here. Pero, like, for example, if man was your data point, then how you describe man? Maybe has a soul, has a name, has a gender. So notice that we're only using numbers. Okay, later on, we'll discuss techniques on how we convert descriptive stuff into numbers. Pero at the end of the day, a vector is a set of numbers. Okay. In this example, dimensionality natin is. See, other questions? Right. So let's take a look at some machine learning terminologies. Okay? So you already understand what a vector is. siguro you might, a more formal term for this is feature vector, okay, which is an array of numbers or a set of numbers representing an entity or observation. Again, you can have a lot of observations, which will eventually become your data set. Pero each observation in your data set is measured by a feature vector. Okay. Dimensionality simply refers to the size of the feature vector. We just discussed that. And then algorithm. Okay. Now, you might see the term machine learning algorithm. Again, do not interchange algorithm with model because they're completely different things. An algorithm is the methodology, the step-by-step process that you will apply against your data to create the model. And there are a lot of algorithms. We'll discuss several of the basic ones. Yung model is the output of the algorithm. It's a set of rules that we define to represent a solution. And a solution often connotates to how we make an actual decision. Now, weights, on the other hand, okay, weights are numerical coefficients of dimensionality. Now, that might be a loaded term, no? Pero it's actually quite important. We'll try to express it mathematically on a general perspective so that you know what these things are. But basically, if you think about it, since we're dealing with numbers, okay, and that a model defines the rules on making a certain decision, then somehow the components of the model have to be driven towards a certain magnitude. For example, let's just take a very arbitrary example. If I'm walking down the street and I need to turn right, or I need to make a decision, do I go right or do I go left? Okay, that's a decision-making process. No? Pero um, what actually drives us to go right? Maybe if I go right, I get to my destination quicker. Okay, kasi let's say I'm going to school or I'm going to work. Okay? But if I go left, I get to visit my crush sa Starbucks, kunwari. Okay? So, I know that's a very weird example, pero that actually defines what weights are. Because if I go right, then it means I actually prioritize going to work rather than to visit my crush sa Starbucks. Diba? If I go left, then it just shows where your priorities are. Okay? So, those priorities on where you are leaning towards making a certain decision. Of course, it's not in that particular scenario, it's not 100%. Rarely would you have 100% to make the decision to go right or left. Okay? Usually, it's half-hearted. No? However, that half-heartedness would allow you to lean towards a certain decision. Let's say 90% right, 10% left. Okay, that magnitude of leaning towards a decision could be exemplified as a weight. Okay, san mas lamang tayo sa decision-making process? Now, if we understand that, then we can easily understand what numerical coefficient means. Kasi given a number, numeric, no? Given a number, if we apply some other number to it, and usually what's the mathematical operation for applying a number? It's multiplication. Yeah, that's why we say if I'm 90% confident towards making a decision, then it's like saying I'm multiplying point 0.9 by point 0.9 times something. Okay, that point 0.9 is the numerical coefficient of my decision to go right. Okay, and then point 0.10 would be my weight to go left. Okay, so that's what we mean by numerical coefficient. Where are we leaning towards? And why is that important? It's important because the models that we produce are actually just a bunch of weights optimized based on our data that drives the decision-making process. So really, at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out what are the optimal weights that fits our decision, which are the numerical coefficients of each dimensionality. Okay, now, what is dimensionality again? Let's go back to the previous slide. Okay. In the case of man, man has a soul, that's one dimension, has a name, that's another dimension, and has a gender, it's another dimension. So if we had a numerical coefficient to emphasize each dimension, then that drives the different aspects of our observation. Okay? Going back to our stock prediction problem, okay, maybe I have more emphasis or more weight for the model that we come up with will have more weight on the latter, on the most recent dimension, which is probably the day before, compared to the 4 previous values, no? Na mas maliit yung weight nila. Okay? So that's what we mean by weight. They are numerical coefficients applied to each dimension. Okay? And they are what the models represent. They're the rules that the models represent. Okay? Algorithms, marami yan. At the end of the day, these algorithms will produce the weights that are needed for our models. Okay. Now, let's take a look at some mathematical. Again, hindi natin maiwasan yung math dito because math is the foundation of all these things. Let's take a look at some variables. Actually, we only need 2 letters at most in terms of representing our data. And that is X and Y. And then 4 variations, which will just be a capitalization of X and Y. Okay, so it might sound complex, pero really it's very simple. It's just X and Y. Okay? So when I talk about X, let's go with small letter X muna, hindi yung capital X. Kasi we already know what small x is. Okay? Small x is simply a vector in the list. Okay? It's simply a vector of numbers. Okay? Or in short, our observation. Capital X is just a collection of your vectors. So your entire data set. Now, because X represents or numerically represents some observation, outcome, buy, sell, or hold, that outcome is represented as Y. Okay? Lowercase y is simply a value in the list of possibilities, not a decision that we have to make. Capital Y is your list of possible values. Now, if you understand that, then the expression in mathematics, f of x, will start to make sense. Kasi f in basic mathematics is often denoted as a function. Now, I want to perform an operation against x. That's why we feed x into a function. And which is also the reason why in basic algebra, we say f of x is equal to y. No? We perform some transformation to x in order for us to build y. Okay? Oh, let's take a look at an example. Let's go to our stock prediction problem. Let's define capital Y as a set of decisions. Do I buy? Do I hold? Or do I sell? Okay. Now, we're dealing with math, so we can't say buy, hold, or sell. We define a number for that. So for example, for buy, that will be +1. For hold, that will be 0. And for sell, that will be -1. So now we're defining it in the domain of mathematics. Now, what will be y? This is capital Y. What will be lowercase y? Based on your understanding dun sa slides, what do you think lowercase y will be? If capital Y is the set of possible outcomes, lowercase y is a value in the list of possibilities. What do you think lowercase y will be in this expression? Anyone? If y is the set of all possibilities, capital Y is all the set of all possibilities. Ano yung lowercase?
So, could be, yung isa, buy, hold, sell, tig-isa-isa sila.
Okay,
Separate.
tig-isa-isa sila. Separate. Correct, correct. So, in that case, we can say y sub 1. Okay, wala akong subscript sa, sa Excel, so I'll just use underscore. So, y sub 1 is 1. Lowercase y sub 2, okay, the second possibility is hold, so 0. And y sub 3, lowercase y, is -1, sell. Okay, so you have a y, which is the set of possible outcomes, in your problem. So if you notice here, it's very important on how you define your problem. Kasi not all of you will be doing stocks. You might be dealing with a different problem. Pero you can generalize it by reducing it to its x and y components. Now, how do we define our x in this case? Now, if we go with our previous definition, na lowercase x is an observation, then it's as if you're saying one lowercase x is actually composed of, okay, x1, x2, out of it, x3, x4, and x5, which are the previous stock prices, okay, of a certain stock, at 5 previous time periods, whether that be daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, depende na sa definition of problem. Okay? So we have a bunch of numbers here. I'll just randomize these numbers. Okay. Static, or let's create a data set. Okay. So these are random numbers. I'll create, let's say, 5 of these. Awesome. Special, combination randomized. All right. So each observation here is a lowercase x. Okay, but each lowercase x is defined in 5 dimensions: x1, x2, x3, and x4, x5. This entire set, I merge these cells. This is our capital X. Ito yung capital X. Because it's the set of all observations, where each observation can be defined in 5 ways.
You say observation, sir, it's also data, right?
A data
The data,
point, correct.
data point, okay.
But you treat it as all 5, because a data point can be described 5 ways. No? You need to define a data point in 5 numerical values. Okay. This is not a data point. Yung isa lang na cell, that's not a data point.
Yep.
Your data point is the entire row in this example. Okay. Other questions? Now, let's make sense of this. No? Maglalagay akong y dito. And hopefully, you can start to see how the data is set up. The data, in the case of stock price prediction, would be 5 dimensions per observation. Okay? And then you would have answers for these. Probably, this observation would tell you to buy because it's y is equal to 1. This observation would tell you to hold because it's y is equal to 0. And this observation will tell you to sell. Same goes for the next one kasi para silang -1. And this fifth row here would be to hold kasi 0 siya. So this is actually an outcome of f of x. Using some model, I should be able to pass. So f actually is a model, okay, with a set of rules already, to transform this x so that I come up with y. And the nice thing about this setup is that they're all already numbers. And because they are numbers, then we can provide computation to it, which means we can write code to actually automate it. So it's very integral that, of course, we define our problem in terms of dimensionality and vectors. And at the same time, when we do that, we can use code to automate it. Kasi some of you talked about big data. Of course, you're not just dealing with 5 observations. You're probably dealing with terabytes of observations, so billions and billions of rows. So having code to automate against it is quite useful. And that's really all the mathematical representation we need. There's actually one more letter, which is W. And those W's are really just the weights of it all. Now, to understand how W works, let's take a look at a very basic mathematical expression. So, from your basic algebra or math back in high school, siguro, who can tell me what this equation is? F of x equals mx plus.
Slope po.
Well, slope is
Ay, yung
actually
M
one
pala.
component of it. Yeah, m is the slope. Pero more generally, it's the equation of what? M is your slope. That's correct. So what does this equation represent? Kung may slope ka, you're actually representing what figure in mathematics? Nandun na yung clue. May slope ka. What is the slope usually for? What
Elasticity po.
ano yan? Sorry.
Elasticity. Slope. Yung B po is intercept. Yun po yung slope intercept.
Okay, so M is the slope, B is what we call the y-intercept. So given those two components, ano yung my question is, what mathematical figure does it actually express?
Is it linear?
It's okay, we're close. No?
Graph.
It's actually a linear equation. But my question is, because it's a linear equation, anong figure yung napoproduce? What's the shape of that figure if it's linear?
Graph.
Yeah, it's a graph of. Actually, nandun na yung answer sa terminal linear. Just take a few letters away from it. Any other guess? Ano na? Try to, anong word yung pwede nyo i-derive sa term na linear? We'll actually talk about linearity later on kasi it's a very interesting concept. Pero dun muna tayo sa intuition. Anong word madederive nyo sa linear? L-I-N-E-A-R. Type it sa chat. What word can you derive from the word linear that is some geometrical, ayoko ibigay kasi yung answer, it's some geometrical representation. And I really would like to focus on this kasi this is actually the foundations of machine learning. Oh, sige na, skip na. If you take away the last two letters, what do you have? It's the equation of, pag wala yung AR, you're left with the word line. Okay, so this is actually the equation of a line. Okay, kasi tama naman, you have the slope, you have the y-intercept. At the end of the day, this expresses the equation of a line. Okay, now, why a line? Let's take a look at our terminologies again. Sabi natin, f of x is equal to y. Now, by substitution, if I interchange these two slides, you can see that f of x is common. Therefore, you can substitute mx plus b, okay, to represent y. That's actually, for me, no, that's a very beautiful expression. Bakit? Kasi ano ba yung y natin? Y is our decision. Diba? Do I buy, do I hold, or do I sell a stock? Okay? So, if y is our decision, and y can be mx plus b, okay, and we know that this is the equation of a line, we can actually expand that. Kasi we already have things that we know here. Anong alam na natin dito? Si x. Sabi natin si x is our dataset, or not our dataset, but our observation. This is an x. Correct?
Yep.
So, if that's the case, and we have a multiplication operation here, no, don't mind B. If we have a multiplication operation here, something beside another letter is multiplication. Then we can actually generalize this. If our x is multidimensional, we can actually generalize this to say that our y, to come up with y, okay, we can generalize this to the following. If n is the number of dimensions that we have in our problem space, and m, our slope, kasi ano ba yung line, without going into too much of the details of linear equations, slope defines how steep our line is. Diba? Sa basic math, that's how we defined it. If our slope is negative, our line is left-leaning. If our slope is positive, it's right-leaning. So that's a very beautiful expression to express how it drives our data. The larger the number, the more right-leaning it is. The more negative the number, the more left-leaning it is. So if we expand that to our dimensions, it means that the W, okay, is the one that influences our dimensions. Now, what that W is, we don't know yet. No? Pero if we generalize it to multiple dimensions, it can be written as f of x, which we know is our y, is equal to simply a multiplication operation of some optimal set of w's, okay, multiplied to our x, that when we consider everything, now the term consider everything can be expressed as an addition operation, plus. When we consider everything, we get a single answer, which is, again, going back to our fundamental expression, y. Okay? Now, if we take that on a very high level, then we can actually understand what machine learning is at the end of the day. Let's take a look at the following. Now, here we have a graph. Okay? Each, some of you might know this as the Cartesian plane, but I don't want to use Cartesian planes. Because if you say Cartesian plane, you're assuming geometry, which means that you have a y-axis and you have an x-axis. For each axis in the world of machine learning, let's represent it as a dimension. Because as we all know, we could have multiple dimensions. No? So this vertical axis here, I'll name as x1, as you can see in the picture. This horizontal axis, as you can see here again, is represented as x2. Okay? x1 and x2. So ilan yung dimensions natin? Dalawa. So if we had pictures of cats and dogs, and let's just say for some magical reason, we can describe cats and dogs in two values, x1 and x2. Then it means to separate cats versus dogs. Now, let's say we're creating a classifier. We want to know, given a picture, is it a cat or is it a dog? What we're actually doing is we're looking for a line whose x1 and x2 coefficients, yung W natin, would separate cats from dogs. No? If we can actually find that line. But what's the problem here? As mentioned earlier, okay, the reason why there's a large demand for data scientists is because this is not the only line that separates cats and dogs in this problem space. Maybe I could draw a line this way. I could also draw a line this way. Of course, it's not a perfect line kasi mousepad lang ako. Pero you can draw multiple lines that would serve as a solution. So going back to the equation, multiple y equals mx plus b. That would solve the same problem. So hindi siya 1 plus 1 equals 2. You can actually come up with different models that can separate cats from dogs. Okay? So now, the trick is, how do we come up with these lines? What are the algorithms that actually come up with these lines? And one of you mentioned linear equation. Okay, ano ba talaga yung linear equation? Okay. It's a line. Okay, kaya siya linear line. The problem with lines is that if I actually had a cat here, okay, may problem space, I'm drawing tayo ng cat. Okay. Kasi sabi natin, a cat or a dog can be described in two numbers. Okay. If I actually had a cat here, I don't think there will be a line that separates cats from dogs. I could probably draw a line here, let's say, ito, pero mali na ako. No? Kasi, andito sa baba ng line yung isang cat and I have 3 cats here. Tapos may error pa ako na dog dito, which is deemed to be a cat. Okay. So, what does this tell us? This means that for this particular problem, the solution is nonlinear. You probably heard of the term nonlinear. Now, it might be a complex concept to grasp, pero if you were to simplify it, when you say something is nonlinear, it simply means that there is no linear solution to solve the problem. Okay, wala kang line, in short, wala kang line that can separate cats from dogs. You could probably draw a line this way. Clear ko lang ito. If I had a cat here, cat, Okay? If I have a cat here, then probably I have a line that looks like this. Okay? Ayan, na-separate na yung cats from dogs. Okay? Pero that line is not a line. It's a non-linear figure because it has a curve, it goes around the feature space. It's not a line at the end of the day. Okay? So, if something is non-linear, it means you can't have algorithms or models that are considered linear to solve the problem. Now, what does that have to do with data science and the problems we're trying to solve in general? Well, if something is linear, then something is very predictable. Diba? Kasi you have a straight line. If you just follow the line, then you follow the trend. But the reality is, a lot of things in the world today are non-linear. Problems in the world today are non-linear. However, there are some tricks in machine learning that forces your data to be linear. Actually, yun yung parang holy grail. If you can prove that something is linear, ang dali i-predict nun kasi you just follow the line. Now, for example, in stocks, you probably heard of the term linear regression. That's a line, okay? But it's a rather weak assumption kasi if you have a linear regression, or in short, if you have a line to regress your stocks, then it means your stocks are actually predictable. It's either always going up at some magnitude or always going down at some magnitude. If you can prove then that's the case, then ang dali, di ba? If it's always going up, then I know at which point in time I have to buy in order to get the maximum profit. Okay? But again, the reality is things are nonlinear. Therefore, we need more powerful tools to make things or to solve nonlinear problems. Okay, now to sum it all up in terms of framing the problem. Okay, let's take an actual problem. This is one of the popular problems. It's actually derived from one of my first students back in university. Lagi kasi siya natutulog sa klase, so I actually used him as an example. So let's discuss the narrative. Okay, so Ryan, not his usual, has a crush on a Starbucks barista. So he'd go to Starbucks on a daily basis to order his favorite drink, just to chat with the barista. The barista seems responsive and talks about non-coffee stuff with Ryan. So making sure not to get his hopes up, Ryan wants to know if the barista is A, flirting with him, or B, just really, really nice. So Ryan has a problem and he wants to use data science to solve this problem. He wants to determine if the barista is nice or actually flirting with him. So if we take Ryan's problem as a data science problem, it would look something like the following. You have your data. Hopefully, we already can identify the components here. Ano yung dimensionality ng data ni Ryan in this case? Yeah, start using the lingo of data science and machine learning. What is the dimensionality of Ryan's problem? If this was the data set. Anyone?
Sir, yung number of smiles, length of chat, tsaka length of eye contact po ba?
Correct. Pero my question is, what is the dimensionality? So what am I looking for?
Yung X po.
Yung X, correct? X is your observations. Pero ano uli definition ng dimensionality? It's how many ways we can describe an observation. So, if the question is, ano yung dimensionality ng problem, what's the answer? I'm actually looking for a number.
X. 6
X
po.
is, it's not 6. It's not 6. 6 would be the number of rows. So that's your capital X.
3.
Pero 3, correct, no? Kasi each observation is described 3 ways: number of smiles, length of chat, length of eye
The
contact.
feature vector. Yep.
It's the feature vector, the size of the feature vector.
Yep.
So the answer is 3. The length of your data set is 6. Kasi what Ryan did is he gathered 6 observations and then he labeled those observations. Of course, yung label natin would be Y, either A or B. Flirt ba siya or just really, really nice. Okay? And then from there, we can perform our modeling. Okay? So in short, I want my data to be set up this way. All numbers, of course, A and B can be converted to numbers, no? 1 or 0. The others are already numbers. Okay? Before I can actually do data science. Okay, now to solve that problem, well, it still depends on what classification of problem we're trying to solve. Before we can decide on which model to use, we need to understand what type of problem we're actually solving. If you can answer that question, then you can start picking out the best algorithm to produce your model. And we have three major ones. Okay? Your problem is either a supervised learning problem, a semi-supervised learning problem, or an unsupervised learning problem. Now let's take the first one because often that's the most common one, but often the hardest to come by. And we'll understand why a little bit later on. If your problem is supervised learning, if you frame your problem as a supervised learning problem, it means that the model you will produce later on, f of x, okay, is derived from data a priori. And what does that mean? It means you already have observations in the past that already have answers with them. Now, what are the answers? Our answers are why. So in this example problem, this can be framed as a supervised learning problem kasi Ryan wants to know if the barista is an A or a B. Di ba?
Yep.
So for Ryan to know that, he gathered a lot of friends, 6 friends in this case, that were labeled A or B. So he already knows data in the past that already has Y values. And from there, he will supervise his model to actually come up with a set of rules to determine if that barista, given 3 dimensions, is an A or B. So a problem is supervised learning if it is supervised by data a priori, or data with all labels that you already know. Okay? Semi-supervised learning, on the other hand, is actually like supervised learning because you have the term supervised there, but it's semi-supervised. So it means na I only know one part of the picture, but based on that, I can know the other parts of the picture. So for example, anomaly detection could be considered semi-supervised learning. Okay, what's an example of anomaly detection? Credit card fraud. I have a bunch of data, okay, that and I want to know if a new data point that comes in is credit card fraud or not. Okay, so what's my why there? My why is credit card fraud ba siya or hindi? Okay, but I don't have enough data to actually model what a fraud is. What I only have are normal transactions, no, valid transactions, non-fraudulent transactions. So that can be framed as a semi-supervised learning problem because I'm trying to create a model given answers that I already know, normal transactions. But based on that, I know what is not a normal transaction. Okay, so it's semi-supervised, no? I'm trying to learn what a fraud is by analyzing the properties of non-fraudulent transactions. Unsupervised is a different beast. No? As the name suggests, unsupervised, I just have my data. So I have a bunch of data, all my X's, okay? But I don't know my Y. And I'll come up with segments or clusters of my X that would share commonalities with them. Okay, so in short, I'm actually performing this thing called segmentation. The segmentation wherein I'm creating groups, clusters of data based on the common properties of that data. I don't have my Y, but I will come up with clusters of X. That's what
Quick
unsupervised learning. Yeah,
question po.
yeah.
So, like for example, you have a bunch of products na gusto mong malaman kung ano yung top 3 doon na nabebenta.
Mhm.
Is that considered unsupervised learning?
Okay,
Kasi,
let's try to argue that. Now, let's argue that.
eh,
If it were unsupervised, why do you think it's unsupervised by definition?
because we don't know what the why is. Pero,
What the Y is? What do we have so far?
the list of products lang.
A list of products, pero not only you can't simply derive it from a list of products kasi you need to have other forms of data to describe what those products are. Diba? So you might have things like ano ba, yung purchase history ng customer, for example,
Quantity
uh,
na nabenta.
quantity na nabenta. No,
Yeah.
those are the different dimensions of your X. Pero you are correct, or arguably that can be unsupervised kasi what you do is you get all this data, you don't have your Y, you cluster them, so you come up with different groups. So
Yep.
malamang yung largest group will be those set of products that could be the most popular one, for example. Okay?
Okay.
Another example would be, let's say, recommendation systems. Let's say sa Netflix, di ba? Parang you watch a bunch of movies, but you don't have the answer of what a person actually prefers. The data will just come up with recommendation based on the behavioral patterns of the person watching Netflix. So that's unsupervised. Okay? Sige, let's try some mental exercises. Let's go back to our uh, stock prediction. I want to determine if I should buy, sell, or hold. Is it supervised, semi-supervised, or unsupervised? Yes. I want to determine if I should buy, sell, or hold. Tapos ito yung data natin. Is it supervised, semi-supervised, or unsupervised?
I'd say supervised.
Bakit siya supervised?
So you already know what you're looking for.
Hey, you have data in the past that already told you whether to buy, hold, or sell.
Correct.
So now, if I actually have a new data point that comes in, let's say itong row na to, I want to know, should I buy, sell, or hold? And based on this data, okay, the model will tell you if you should have a 1, 0, or -1. Okay?
Yep.
All right. It's actually different if, here's another way to frame this stock problem. It's actually different if I want to determine what patterns exist. Okay. Given 5 consecutive stock prices, okay, for each observation, wala yung Y natin. I want to determine what the common patterns are. Okay, may pattern ba na mukhang ganito? Okay, may pattern ba na mukhang ganito? Okay, and these lines are composed of 5 stock prices. Okay, and so on and so forth. That's actually an unsupervised problem. Kasi you're grouping different observations of 5 numeric values each that actually describes a pattern in your data. Okay, we'll actually deal with this problem when we deal with clustering, actually, clustering algorithms. Okay. Sige, questions muna sa case na. So, ano yung moral dito? Again, we're not dealing with anything very deep. We're dealing with fundamentals. Machine learning is not a single entity, but it really depends on how you frame your problem. Okay, are you framing your problem as a supervised or unsupervised framework approach? Kahit yung dalawang yun. Okay, which brings us to the highlight of this morning's session, setting up our tools. So hopefully we can get this tool set up before we head out to our lunch break. Para sa hapon, we can start with playing around with them. And let's try out some very basic modeling, hopefully if we have time. Okay, so the tools of a data scientist would be actually marami. You can actually use R for this. Pero I guess the more popular ones would be Python and this thing called the Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so think of it as having a spell book of sorts, wherein we write our spells and we sort of see if it works. That's how I sort of describe what Jupyter Notebook is. Okay, pero to get started with, we need Python. So Python is actually a general programming language. When we say general programming language, it can be used to create all sorts of software, web applications, machine learning algorithms, models, yeah, all sorts of software that you can think of. Python can do that for you. But for this to actually work, we need an interpreter. So the idea there is we write code in Python, something human readable, and we have this thing called a Python interpreter that translates the code into computer language. Because computers only understand two things, a one or a zero. It's just binary. So a collection of ones and zeros would translate to instructions in a computer. We can't code in binary. We can, but it would take too long. So we write higher level abstractions of those binary code, which is given by our Python code and interpreted by a Python interpreter. Now, Jupyter, on the other hand, is an application on top of Python that allows us to write code um, in the tool called the Jupyter Notebook that we can execute in our computer. Okay, so what I'll show you right now is how to set this up. So yeah, skip that part. Let's go to the technical part. First, we need Python installed in our computer. So I provided the link here. For those who haven't downloaded Python yet, feel free to download Python from this link. So, puntahan ko lang. So, punta lang kayo dito sa downloads. I'll post the link in the chat. Now, the latest, I think, is 3.11, not mistaken. Just depending on what you're using, Windows, Linux, or Mac, just download the installer, double click it, install it in your machine. And then for you to verify if it actually works, okay, you can type either one of the following. No? Depende kasi kung, usually for Windows, it's PY. For other operating systems, it's Python or sometimes Python 3. Again, it depends on the installation process. So try either one of these, Python or PY, if you're on Windows, as long as may lumabas na something like this. Now, where do you actually type this? You type this in the command line. Okay, now we won't be focusing too much on the command line, but we'll need it to install Jupyter later on. Okay. So as long as you can type in the following. So the command line in Windows is the CMD program. So you click on start, type in CMD, you get the black screen terminal. Try to type in Python space / version, or if you're on Windows, py space / version after you have installed it. So I'll give you a few minutes to download it. I'll be here to help you guys out. So kung may problem kayo with installation, let me know. You can share your screen para matulungan ko kayo. Sige, let's have that for now. So goal muna, download Python and make sure you can print out a version of Python from the command line. And then siguro I'll ask for a volunteer to do the next step para at least makita natin yung process. Let me know kung may questions. Once you're done, and verify nyo na naka-install yung Python by either typing python -- version or py space -- version, may lumabas na version number, then we're good. Okay, please type in done sa chat para alam ko when we can move to the next part.
Sir, sabi dito setup was successful. Ano po tong path length limit na nakalabas?
Sige, I'm not sure kasi depende yan sa
Ay, nakasulat po dito, ano po sir? Changes in your machine configuration to allow program, including Python, to bypass the 260 character max path limitation.
I'm not sure. Pero sige, okay lang pwede pa share nung screen mo so I can pick up.
Okay po. Ito lang po yung ano sir. Disable ko po ba to or okay na ba?
Hindi ko makita yung screen mo. Wait lang. Sorry, there's something wrong with my Zoom. Just give me a few seconds. Log out lang ako, tapos I'll log back in. Wait lang. Okay, sorry about that. Sino yun? Si Carla ba yun? Hindi ko na-catch yun.
Ay, ako po, sir.
Benedict. Okay. Pwede pa share mo screen.
Okay po. Ito po. Ano pa yung lumalabas? I-disable ko po ba or close ko lang po?
Yeah, I think you should disable length limit.
Ayun, okay na pa.
Alright. Okay, tapos, okay lang. Tapos na ba yung installation at that point? Or parang nag-download ka lang? Or something?
Dinownload ko lang po.
Okay. Sige. Try to click on the installer tapos let's just wait until na-install siya.
Okay pa.
For the others, kung may questions kayo, let me know. Okay. Randy, na-confirm mo sa command line? May lumalabas na version?
Ano po?
Okay. Ayan, so it should be something like that. So py space -- version 3.11. Wait for the others.
Sir, kumbaga magta-type lang po kami sa CMD po.
Yes. After installation, para lang ma-verify.
Okay po. Ay, sir, pwede po ako mag-share screen. Hindi po kasi niya nakuha eh.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay pa. Ita-type ko lang po dito. Ito po, py
Yeah.
dash
Kul-
dash version.
Kulang ka lang ng space. So py space -- version. Alright.
Ayan, okay na pa. Thank you po.
Alright.
Ibig sabihin, sir, case sensitive po yung sa Python.
Yes. Everything that we deal at this point, case sensitive.
Oh, okay pa.
Okay. Is that everyone? Yeah, I think.
Sir, yung sa akin nag-error.
Sige. Can I take a look? Okay. The thing is, I think na-activate mo yung Python. So you're actually inside the Python
Sa Python, no?
interpreter. Yeah. So to exit that, press Control D.
Sa CMD.
Na-launch mo yung Python CMD. Okay. Yeah. So, sige, buksan mo na yung CMD from there. You can close that window. Siguro. Okay. And then, hanapin mo yung CMD sa Windows. So, just hit on Windows and then CMD. Okay, and then type in py space dash dash version. py space dash dash version. Ayan. Okay, so that's working. Sige. Okay, great. Now, I think that's everyone. No? So who'd like to volunteer for the next part? Kasi I think mas okay kung manggaling isa sa inyo to do this next part. So I can walk you through the process. Since I think lahat kayo naka-Windows. Any volunteer?
I
Kasi
can do it.
okay, sige. Thank you, Randy. Please share your screen. So the next thing we'll do right now is create what's called a virtual environment or an environment, a Python environment. Now, what is a Python environment? Kasi we don't want to disturb other things in your computer. Kasi we'll be installing dependencies later on to or third-party software na gusto natin contained lang sa isang environment. So if you don't need that, all you have to do is to destroy that environment. Okay? So first thing we'll do, sige, Randy, okay lang, gawa ka ng isang folder in your computer where you will do all your machine learning stuff. It's up to you on where you want to put it. Pero do let us know where you put it. Sa documents ba? Basta create a folder na lang for data science.
May ko sa drive di ko.
Okay, pwede. Can you show the path then para what I can see kasi right now is the yung browser.
Ito yung folder.
Okay, so machine learning, all right. Okay, so can you click on that? Tapos can you copy the path? So you can click on that. Yan. And then can you cd into that path? So from the command line, so go to cmd. Tapos just type in cd space and then the path.
Ano yung command?
cd call directory cd. Yan, space. And then type in the path for machine. Yan. Okay. Okay, so, kasi I think with Windows, you have to transfer to drive D, nasa drive C ka pa. I forgot how to do that from the command line. I think you just type in D:\\. Can you try that? Backslash. ;\.
So I think we need space between the colon and the backslash.
Sige, can you try that? Okay, there we go. Ayan, okay, nasa machine learning. Great. Okay, so what's the point here? No? From the command line, kung saan nyo man gusto ilagay yung environment nyo, yung folder, no? Where your environment will be installed in, make sure you're in that part of the command line. Okay, so in the case of Randy, nasa drive D siya in a folder called machine learning. Okay? Now, after you achieve that, we create a virtual environment. We do so by, the commands are actually in the slides, no? Pero sige, type in py-m. Okay. M is like a module in Python. So we're using a module in Python called vn, or virtual environment. The last set of characters, env, will be a folder that will be created inside the machine learning folder ni Randy, which will represent our environment. Sige, can you please execute that? Will take some time, pero while waiting, Randy, can you show us dyan sa machine learning folder? You should have a folder there called PNP. There you go. Okay. So that folder represents your Python environment specific for that machine learning stuff. Okay. Our goal kasi later on is when we install the third-party tools, like Jupyter and sklearn later on, everything will be stored in that folder. So if you don't need that environment anymore, all you have to do is to simply destroy that folder. So it makes everything isolated. Now, what we'll do next is, after you have produced that folder, we will need to activate that environment. So that we'll be using the Python interpreter within that environment and not the one that you installed locally. Okay? So sige, let's go back now. Okay, to activate that, there's a command. Sige, can you go to the slides? Depending on where you are kasi, sige, can you go to the env folder na para at least visual tayo. Okay, kasi it's PS1 if you're using PowerShell script. Pero kasi if you're on the command line, it's actually .bat. So can you repeat yan? Can you try that out? Okay. Notice na nagkaroon ka ng prefix na env. Okay, so on the left-hand side, the one in parentheses, that means you're in the environment. Now, just to verify that you're in the environment, you can now type in Python space dash dash version. Not py, Python, which will use the Python installation in that environment. Enter. Okay, so as you can see, it's the same version as you have the one installed locally. But really what it does is that it's taking the Python interpreter from the env folder. Okay, to deactivate that environment, you just type in deactivate. Sige, can you try that, Randy? Deactivate. Enter.
Press enter.
Yeah. Sorry, enter. Okay, so notice mawawala yung env. Okay, so try to activate the environment again. You can actually press up to look at the look for the previous commands. What you want is the batch script, the .bat script. Yeah. Enter. And now you're back in the environment. Okay, because you have that parentheses. So for the others, can you try to do that? Navigate to your folder. Tapos, create an environment by typing in py-mvn-env. Tapos, activate the environment by typing in env scripts activate.bat. If you're on Windows, then it should be .bat. Right. Sige, thank you, Randy.
Sir, important po ba na nasa program D yung environment?
No, not necessarily. Si Randy just preferred to put it in the
Okay pa. Done na po ako, sir.
Okay. Sige. For the others,
Done na po.
all right. Si Patrick na lang, I guess.
Done na po, sir.
All right. Okay, let's move to the next part now. Let's share my screen now. I'll do the same thing. I'll put mine in. I usually put it in workspace. Let's see. Okay, it doesn't matter where it is now, as long as you have a folder for, let's say, machine learning. So I'm inside that folder. In my case, because I don't use py, in my installation it's Python 3, but it's the same thing. Env, venv. So I get that env folder. Depending on your operating system, in my case on Linux, it would be a different batch file, plus a different command. Don't worry, everything is documented naman dun sa slides. But the result is the same. So I have this env prefix in my command line, which indicates that I'm inside the virtual environment. So I can just run python -- version and I'm using 3.10. You're probably using a later version, but that's fine. Okay. Now that I have that, we're all on the same page. We'll now move to installing third-party dependencies. Okay? Now, what are third-party dependencies? These are Python modules or libraries similar to DLL files for Windows that adds more functionality to our Python environment. For now, what we need is the Jupyter dependency. Later on, we'll be installing a other bunch of stuff. But the thing with installing third-party dependencies in Python is we make use of this pip command. Now, this is installed together with your Python installation. It's a Python package manager that downloads it from what's called the pip repository. Okay, so you have all sorts of software that you need in Python ecosystem for all sorts of things. We need Jupyter. Okay? So to install this, again, make sure that you are inside the virtual environment. So we do pip install and then Jupyter. Now Jupyter that's Jupyter with a Y, so Jupyter. So once we click enter,
Wait lang anak ha.
once we click enter, it will download the necessary dependencies from the repository. Now, depending on your internet speed, no, it might take a while. So just wait for it until it returns back to the command prompt. Kasi may mga iba pang dependencies siyang dina-download. So Jupyter depends on other dependencies. Okay? So try that out first. Again, the command that I typed in was pip install Jupyter. Okay.
Nag-trigger yung kwan ko, sir.
Yung
Antivirus.
Yeah.
yeah. So I think you need to allow it kasi parang it treats it like an external program. Okay, so let's wait for everyone to install their Jupyter software. Then let me know.
Done na po.
Okay. Right. For the others, okay na rin?
Yes po.
All right.
Ano po, sir?
Now, what is Jupyter? So Jupyter is a way for us to execute Python code in what's called a Jupyter notebook. Now, for that to work, we actually write our Jupyter notebook code using the browser. Okay, so we don't need to have any text editor because it will be presented to us as a web application. But for that to work, we need to run what's called the Jupyter server. Okay, so it's actually a server running where we interact with the server via the browser. Okay? So to activate our Jupyter server, we type in the command Jupyter, okay, after installation, Jupyter space notebook space dot. Okay, so this will, or actually just Jupyter notebook will be Jupyter space notebook. What this will do is it will turn on the server. As you can see, nag-auto, auto run siya. Pero if you take a look at the command line, after we've typed in the command, ayan, update, blah, 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 we're running Jupyter Notebook 7. Actually, there's version 7 already. I think we're running version 6, but it doesn't matter now. What matters is we're now running in Notebook, which is running in IT, we call this a port, on port 8888. So to access that, we simply go to our browser. Sometimes it opens up immediately. Okay? And you will be presented with the following. Now notice, it shows you the file system. Kung hindi nabukas yung browser nyo, you can just navigate to localhost colon 8888 for 8s, no? And you should be presented with this one. Notice that it actually shows you the file system of the folder where you ran the command. Now, in my case, that would be machine-learning. In Randy's case, that would be in drive B, machine learning. In your case, whatever folder you have in the virtual environment.
Sir, may tanong lang po ako, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yung sa akin po, sir, may lumabas na update tapos run po nung sa Python.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it appeared in my. Sorry, can you show your screen para at least? No. Okay, that's fine. That's just for upgrading Pip. You can actually run that later on. Pero hindi siya important for the artist.
Okay.
Try mo i-run yung Jupyter notebook. So, ayan. See if it works. Ayan. So it will run in port 8888 and then I think your browser should automatically pop up. For the others, same din ba yung lumalabas? Kita nyo na yung Jupyter Notebook mo sa browser?
Yes po.
Yes, sir.
Alright. Sige. Alright, I'll share my screen again. Thank you, Patrick. Okay. Share screen ako. Okay. Now, if you're all in this interface, basics muna tayo, no? We have a few minutes to launch. If you want to kill the server, okay, so dun muna tayo sa on and off. From the command line, you simply press Control C. You Control C and then Y when it asks you yes or no, and then babalik ka sa command prompt. Okay? So every time we start, next Saturday, when we start writing code, we turn on our server. So activate your environment, turn on your Jupyter Notebook server, and you will be brought to this. Okay, to kill the server, simply press Control C. Okay, and then yes. Okay, so I now have my server running. Now to actually create a notebook, okay, on this prompt, on the upper right-hand side, may makikita tayong new dito. So we click on that, and then we choose Python 3. And what this will do is it will create a new notebook running on the Python 3 kernel. So this is what a notebook looks like. Okay. I'll explain the tools later on, pero if you see, it created a file called untitled.ipynd. I'm in the other tab which shows the files of the current file system, which is this one. Okay. We can rename this notebook by clicking on the untitled part, and you can replace it with whatever name you want. So for example, I'll say basic programming. Okay, so that will be the name of the notebook. Okay. And this is where we will run our Python code. Okay, this is the scratch pad of sorts that we'll use to run our code at the same time write our prototypes for modeling later on. Okay. So yeah, try that out first. Create your first notebook and then name your notebook. Okay, I'll just call this basic programming because that's where we'll start off. Basic Python program. Is everyone able to create their first notebook?
Yes po.
Hindi. Sir, pwede po magpa-share ng link sa G Drive. Hindi po ata ako nabigyan.
For the slides.
Po.
Okay.
Hinahanap ko po, sir.
Nasa chat.
Ito si chat earlier, pero baka tawag. I posted it again. Sige, gusto mo share ka ng screen para we can see where you are, where you're at.
Nawala po ako sa focus na hindi ko po install.
Tama yan. Tumatakbo na yung notebook mo sa case na yan. So all you have to do is to go to localhost port 888.
Ay, dito pa sa localhost lang.
Yeah. So punta ka sa browser and then, ayan, okay na. Tapos, on the upper right-hand side, kita mo yung new button.
Okay pa.
Okay, new. Tapos Python 3, okay. Yan yung bagong notebook mo.
Okay pa.
Wait for a bit. Tapos you can rename it by clicking on the title. Tapos, yan. And then rename it in. That's one notebook. You can create multiple notebooks. Sige, balik ka dun sa isang tab. Yung katabi niya lang. Nakikita mo na, ayan. So, nandiyan yung notebook mo.
Okay pa.
So, you could have a lot of notebooks.
Okay
So, kung
pa.
gusto mo patayin yung server, Control C lang sa command line and that will kill the server.
Dito
Okay.
po ba?
Yeah. Kung gusto mo lang patayin yung server. Pero
Ay,
siguro,
pinatay ko.
pinatay.
Oo nga, sir. Di na ako makatype.
Tumatakbo naman na siya. Hindi, tumatakbo pa siya. Hindi pa siya patay.
Pero hindi na po ako makatype.
Hindi, okay lang kasi tumatakbo yung server. So hindi
Okay
ka
po.
talaga makaka-type.
Okay po.
So sige, for practice lang, try mo patayin, sige, practice mo lang patayin yung server and then buksan mo. Okay, so sige, it's already lunchtime. Let's take a break first. Resume tayo 1 p.m. Pero after lunch, make sure that you have your notebooks kasi doon tayo magsa-start.
Okay po.
Alright, sige. Thank you everyone. I'll see you guys in 1 hour. Let's have our lunch break first.
Thank you po.
Okay. Tawag niyan, guys. Ay, hindi. Yung other participants, you may go. Si, what do you call that? Yung kapapasok lang, si Lenel. Hello, Lenel. Hello?
Hello, miss.
Yeah, paki-coordinate na lang kay TJ, si Timothy with regards to your tawag diyan, workshop details. Medyo late ka na kasi eh. Guys, you may go. Si Leonard kasi kakapasok niya lang. So, we wanna know lang yung niya, yung plan.
Ma'am, kuha na lang kami. Babalik na lang mamaya sa same Zoom.
Yeah,
link.
yeah. Same
Okay.
link. Yeah.
I'll
Guys,
leave us
you may go.
lunch meeting din ako. I'll see you guys. Okay.
TJ, kausapin natin si Lenel kung ano yung plan niya. Kasi medyo late na siya. Marami na actually na tackle na topics. Hello, Lenel. Hello?
Yes po. May seminar pa kasi inatinan. Kakatapos lang kaya na-late ako.
Hmm. Ay, ayan. Sige, paki-coordinate na lang kay TJ yung details, ha, Lenel? Kasi iba yung na-submit mo ata. Okay na, Lenel?
Yes po, copy.
Will you proceed? Kasi only legitimate registrants lang kasi ang pinapapasok namin. Okay na, Lenel? Sige. Bye.